The Detroit Tigers are a proud and historic franchise with a dedicated but tortured fan base. Ty Cobb, Al Kaline, Alan Trammell, and Miguel Cabrera are the names that come to mind for most people when thinking of Tiger greats. But this storied franchise has not won a World Series since 1984, hasn't made the World Series since 2012, and hasn't made the playoffs in almost a decade, and hasn't even had a chance of making the playoffs since 2016. And coming off a season that had playoff hope at the start and widespread disgust at the end, many fans are becoming increasingly angry at the lack of improvement. But what led us here? Why have the Tigers had so many amazing players and teams since 1984, but no World Series rings?
On the ground, second base. Listen to him roar. Tigers in 4.
For the first time since 1982, St. Louis has a World Series winner.
In 1985, the Tigers completely fell apart. At the start it looked promising with a 6-0 record to start the year, but after that their hitting fundamentals and bullpen would be the end of the Tiger repeat hopes, going 84 and 77, finishing third in their division, a far cry from 1984's success. The rest of the 86 season would see guys like Trammell return to form and put the Tigers back on a positive trajectory. 87 would see Detroit win the AL East with a high-powered offense that could hit amazingly well and was patient enough to lead the American League in walks. They were set to face the Minnesota Twins in the ALCS. But it would end in disappointment as the Tigers lost in 5 games. This was a huge step in the right direction for the Tigers though. Unfortunately, in 88, with guys like Matt Noakes regressing majorly and losing Kirk Gibson, the Tigers would finish second in the AL East with an 88 and 74 record. But Detroit still had hope. Good players and a good front office that could lead the Tigers to victory. Right? '89 was hell on a baseball field, going 59 and 103. This would spell the end of the Tigers' hopes of any success. There wasn't just one thing hurting the Tigers, it was everything. Everything was bad. The core was aging, the bats were cold all the time, and the pitching was mediocre at its very best. But amidst the whole team filled with disappointment and horrid performances, there was one man who provided hope. Cecil Fielder, a 31st round draft pick who just a few years ago was bought by a team in Japan, was signed by Detroit. He became a fan favorite after leading baseball in home runs and RBIs for 2 years straight. It just made sense. A guy who had been given up on by multiple teams and had even been out of Major League Baseball entirely, working his way to become one of the top players in Major League Baseball. And he played in a city that values blue-collar athletes more than any other city in the world. He was a young star of baseball, playing on a dismal team that had fallen from grace. From 1990 to 1993, the Tigers were middling, always finishing around second or third in the AL East with little playoff hope. But in 1994, the Tigers reached a new low. With Lou Whitaker, Alan Trammell, and Kirk Gibson all reaching the end of their careers and finishing a lockout-shortened year 53-62, it was not looking good for Detroit at all. It took 12 seasons to win over 80 games, with a 43-119 season in 2003 being the lowest of lows. After 96, there was no Cecil Fielder. Gone were the days of Trammell, Whitaker, Gibson, and Morris. Now you had Craig Monroe, Roman Santiago, Dimitri Young, and Nate Cornejo. 2006 would end an 18-year playoff drought. Finally, the city of Detroit could enjoy good baseball once more, with guys like Pudge Rodriguez, Carlos Guillen, Maglio Ordonez, and Justin Verlander hoisting the city of Detroit to baseball's biggest stage. A 95-67 season would place them second in the AL Central with an ALDS matchup against the much-hated New York Yankees. And it wasn't even a contest, with Detroit winning in 4 games and the same in the ALCS, winning against Oakland in a 4-game sweep. A team that hadn't been to the playoffs in almost 20 years was going to the World Series. It was unbelievable. And then it was gone. The Tigers lost in 5 games to the Cardinals. Maglio Ordonez and Pudge Rodriguez went cold all series, and the team never scored more than 4 runs in a single game, getting blown out in games 1 and 3. And that horrible collapse carried into 2007, where the Tigers would finish 8 games out of first place, with the whole offense not being too bad, but the pitching staff as a whole floundered outside of Verlander. 8 out of 9 guys in the starting lineup were over 30, so it was clear that the window to contend was closing fast. And on December 4th, 2007, a trade would change the trajectory of the Detroit Tigers forever. The trade to acquire young Marlins slugger Miguel Cabrera. The Tigers still continued to decline, finishing last in the AL Central, but Detroit had some pieces to climb back to relevance. In 2009 and 2010, the Tigers were a middle-of-the-pack team that was retooling to become a contender. Guys like Alex Avila, Victor Martinez, and Max Scherzer would come to Detroit, with Miguel Cabrera, the savior of Detroit baseball, and AL Cy Young winner Justin Verlander leading them to the playoffs in 2011. Secretly, we all know that Don Kelly was the actual reason for Detroit's newfound success, but we will just stick with the popular narrative for now. With an ALDS matchup against the New York Yankees lined up, most knew this would be a battle. The Tigers got clobbered 9-3 in Game 1, but took back Games 2 and 3, and then got absolutely demolished in Game 4 by a score of 10-1. But in the deciding Game 5, with home runs from Don Kelly and Delman Young, the Tigers took the series and advanced to the ALCS. Detroit would go back and forth against the Rangers, but in a win-or-go-home Game 6, they would suffer an embarrassing 15-5 defeat. This team clearly needed better defense. So, in 2012, the Tigers signed Anibal Sanchez to help the pitching staff and traded for Prince Fielder, yes, the son of Tigers great Cecil Fielder. Mike Ilitch had deep pockets and wasn't scared to show it. He was hungry for a World Series title and would bring in whatever players to help achieve that goal. This team had stars on top of stars, but didn't finish the regular season with a super impressive record. Only 88 wins, but a Triple Crown title for Miguel Cabrera and 30 homers from Prince Fielder, along with the pitching staff performing very well, led by another great year for Justin Verlander. Detroit would finish first in the AL Central and were set to face Oakland in the ALDS. Detroit got out to a 2-0 lead in the ALDS against Oakland, but the A's came back winning 2 in a row to tie the series at 2-all. And in the deciding Game 5, the Tigers would decisively win 6-0. In the ALCS, they swept the New York Yankees in a rather uncompetitive series that left the Tigers feeling invincible. They just topped the greatest franchise in all of baseball to send themselves to the World Series. With a roster filled with the most talent any Tigers fan had seen since the days of Whitaker, Trammell, and Morris, set to play the San Francisco Giants, the Tigers were ready to win a championship for Detroit and end the almost 30-year championship drought. After decisively losing games 1, 2, and 3, Game 4 was going into extra innings. The Tigers may have been down, but they were not out. Just like the city of Detroit, the Tigers would fight against all odds to stay alive. But the Giants score at the top of the 10th to make it 4-3. And Detroit would go 3 up, 3 down, and Miguel Cabrera was the final out as he struck out looking. 2013 was set to be a huge year for the Tigers. Fresh off a World Series appearance, Detroit was ready to improve and win a championship. Guys like Torrey Hunter and Omar Infante, who was now in his second stint with the Detroit Tigers, were acquired to bolster the roster. Detroit had 6 All-Stars and 5 guys in the starting lineup batting over 300, and 3 starting pitchers with a sub-3.5 ERA. And this was good enough for a 93-win season that obviously placed them first in the AL Central. They would face the Oakland A's once more in the ALDS, and once more take the series all the way to Game 5 and win. The Tigers would now face Boston in the ALCS. Game 1 was a win for Detroit, but Boston won Games 2 and 3. Game 4 was a decisive 7-3 victory for Detroit, with the series tied 2-2. Game 5 was set to be an amazing game. The Tigers went down 4-0 in the third inning, but Detroit mounted a slow comeback that put them just 1 run behind in the 8th inning. But Detroit went 3 and out in the 8th and 9th to end the series and send the Tigers home empty-handed once more. Mike Ilitch went all in once more, bringing in Ian Kinsler in exchange for Prince Fielder. Nick Castellanos was given the full-time third base spot, J.D. Martinez was signed, and they acquired David Price to complete one of the most deadly rotations in all of baseball. This roster was once again loaded and won 90 games. The Tigers, for the 4th year straight, were a championship contender and were hungry for a championship. But as the Tigers are prone to do, they choked, getting swept by Baltimore in the ALDS. In 2015, the Tigers would regress majorly, winning only 74 games. Over the next few years, the roster was deconstructed piece by piece, with a failed attempt of making the playoffs in 2016, and the firing of Dave Dombrowski led to the hiring of the horrible Al Avila. The Tigers had back-to-back 90-loss seasons in 2017 and 2018, but by 2019, the team had regressed back to the 2003 team with a 47-114 record. Even the mighty Miguel Cabrera began to regress and deal with injury problems. Al Avila destroyed the team and ran it into the ground, but in 2021 did provide hope. A Tigers team that had majorly improved in the second half of the year. They didn't make the playoffs, but they had some major talent in the farm system, along with vets like Jonathan Scope and Robbie Grossman, both hitting over 20 homers. Akil Baddoo and Eric Haas were pleasant young surprises. Casey Mize was looking like an all-star, with young guys like Matt Manning, Tarek Skubal, and Spencer Turnbull all having major upside. In the 2022 offseason, they brought in Eduardo Rodriguez, Javier Baez, Andrew Chafin, Tucker Barnhart, and Austin Meadows. Number 1 overall pick Spencer Torkelson had an amazing spring training and made the roster along with promising young outfielder Riley Green. The Tigers were set to make a playoff run, but it all fell apart within the first week. Casey Mize had to get Tommy John after just 2 starts. Riley Green got injured at the end of spring training and was out for months. Matt Manning and Tarek Skubal were injured off and on. Eduardo Rodriguez literally disappeared for 30 days and didn't come back until late August. Austin Meadows played great until he got injured and was out for basically the whole year. And what made it even worse was that he was set to come back but then got re-injured due to the type of shoes he was wearing. Tucker Barnhart, Jonathan Scope, Robbie Grossman, and Jeimer Candelario all regressed majorly. Javier Baez played good the first week, then fell off, and then didn't play well consistently again until the season was basically over. Spencer Torkelson and Akil Baddoo, while I love them, did not play up to expectations, And the only people who played up to expectations were Riley Green and Miguel Cabrera at 39 years old. The bats went cold for the whole season. Not a single player who played consistently hit over 20 homers and batted over 280. The whole season was one big dumpster fire that left everyone wondering why. Why and how do we always manage to do this kind of stuff? I'm cautious to say there is some hope. Scott Harris looks to be a good executive, and AJ Hinch is in it for the long haul. Guys like Torque and Baду look to have bounce-back years along with Javi. The problem is, why are the Tigers doing nothing in free agency right now? Justin Henry Malloy could be a good infielder in 2 or 3 years, but we need someone now. We haven't acquired a single bat to help the lineup. The Tigers are a state of perpetual disappointment that these fans do not deserve. This proud franchise has been reduced to a laughingstock.
I love my friend Dan Petrie. I'm going to totally disagree. I think you got to expect to make the playoffs. Okay, this is a franchise. It's a proud franchise. It's an original American League franchise that has won 4 World Series. Not since these guys suited up in 1984. That's unacceptable. St. Louis has 11. The Dodgers have won 10 straight division titles, for crying out loud. The Braves have won 6 in a row. It's ridiculous. The bar has to be set higher for the Tigers, and AJ Hinch admits it. You don't want to cover losing teams any longer. He wants to play meaningful games. We've taken good players and thinking that they're great players that we're making them almost iconic, when really that bar is set on a too low of a basis. Detroit has got to get back to expecting bigger things from this baseball team, and I think Scott Harris will bring that, and I think AJ Hinch will relay that for certain.